why the title ended up being Live Empowered, because many, many empowerment movements in our history begin with the idea of seeing what's not visible, like those subtle things that keep us held back.
What's up, everybody? It's Charlie Hoehn, the host of Author Hour, where I interview authors about their new books. And today's episode is with Dr. Julie Lopez. She's the author of Live Empowered. So this episode is awesome because Julie breaks down how to rewire your brain, specifically your implicit memory, which are the past experiences you can't recall, but that remain stored deep in your subconscious mind. So if you've ever noticed these invisible barriers that seem to hold you back from making desired changes, either in your business or in love or just in life, this is definitely the episode for you, because these roadblocks might seem like minor things or they might seem insurmountable. But with the approach that Julie specializes in, you can get past those roadblocks by hacking into the regions of your mind that influence your daily life. This episode is really perfect for people who are super motivated and have tried different forms of therapy. They understand on an intellectual level what's getting in their way, but on a physical and emotional level, they're not quite there yet. So, without further ado, here is our conversation with Dr. Julie Lopez.
"25 years ago, when I was fairly new to living on my own, I was cooking something, and I was cooking with oil, and a grease fire started. And because I was pretty inexperienced, I was trying something pretty new too. I threw water on this fire, and the fire exploded, and the kitchen caught on fire, and things in the kitchen caught on fire. And in that moment, I was completely terrified, and I ran out of the house because I did not know what was going to happen. I kind of calmed down, went back in because the whole house hadn't exploded. It was just the kitchen on fire. I went back in and I managed to mostly put the fire out, call the landlords, call my roommates and all that stuff. But for kind of a long time afterwards, when people, and one person in particular, I remember teasing me when I was at the gym, kind of telling him about what had happened in a good-natured way, I was pretty cross with him. I lost my temper, and actually it made me tear up a bit. And I was frustrated with that because I hadn't died. The house hadn't burned down. It was mildly inconvenient. We had to do some repairs. I was obviously through it. He meant nothing wrong by it, but I was really reactive when he was being playful. And it was frustrating because of all the things I just mentioned. It didn't make sense. It didn't make logical sense to me. And I was being kind of mean. So one of the things that was really major for me, and this was during a time before I went back to school, I was working as an engineer, but I had been in therapy, and I told my therapist I was frustrated. And he suggested I try something that sounded really crazy to me. It's something that's a brain-based therapy, which I know very well now. And this brain-based therapy is called EMDR. And I tried it, and in one session, he did some kind of interesting things. I had to follow something with my eyes, and there wasn't a lot of talking. But what did happen is that from that moment forward, from one session, I no longer had any of the reactions to this fire I had been in that had really distressed me. And if someone teased me about it, I was actually fine. So the things in my body that had been reacting, like the fear and my throat closing up and being agitated, totally went away. And I thought it was pretty cool because I have had many other times in my life where I've known something logically, but could not perform physically because I was having a reaction. And So that really was the beginning of my introduction to this whole world that works with a different part of our brain that holds kind of data that tells our bodies how to act, and it's stored in our unconscious called implicit memory. And what's been really cool about it is seeing with myself and with clients about how realities can really shift when you get to the brain center where the messaging is actually stored.
Wow. Man, I have at least 10 questions I could ask you right out the gate.
Awesome.
The very first one is, what is EMDR? Like, what does that stand for?
So it stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a really long name, which is why most people just call it EMDR. But what's interesting, Charlie, is that the founder, Francine Shapiro, when she developed it, which is based on it's a whole theoretical orientation with 8 different steps to it. But what it's mostly known for is that it uses bilateral stimulation of the brain, the right and left sides of your brain, and it's no longer just limited to the eyes. That's what she used initially when she was doing her beginning research, but you can use sound, so you can stimulate the brain on the right and left side simultaneously. With sound, you can use tactile, like touch. There are these tappers. This is all done with equipment, but the touch actually goes from the right, left, right, left, right, left with this bilateral stimulation. And it helps to open up neural pathways in your brain that control the messaging to the rest of your body.
Wow. Huh.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So let me make sure I'm getting this straight. The Neanderthal brain that I have with this sort of thing. So it stimulates your senses on both sides of your body, and because of that, the pathways that may have been previously closed off start to open up again?
No, and it's actually interesting that you just picked the word Neanderthal and with your brain, because the story I just told, and I don't want to get too geeky because, the thing that I worked on really hard with my book was to be able to tell things in a very relatable way. I actually had one of my early reviewers say, wow, I thought I was doing you a favor to do this kind of book review and read through it, but I didn't know it was going to be such a page turner. And that meant a lot to me because he's not a clinician. It's actually a very successful international business person. And he said, this was very easy for me to read. It was very relatable. And coincidentally, the story I just told about the terror that happened for me in the moment when the explosion happened and flames happened immediately actually did ignite a very primitive part of my brain that said, you're going to die and let's kick it into high gear to do what you need to do to get out of it. And so it encoded a message in my brain. And it basically said, you're going to die. Like fire equals die, right? And it's very primitive. And so when my friend was teasing me about the fire, I reacted like I was going to die and that he was making fun of my death moment. But I didn't think that at all. Like the frontal lobe of my brain did not think that, but a different part of my system already had a different code in it. So for this particular one, most of the things that are stored in implicit memory happen with the hippocampus, and the amygdala is a part of the limbic system, which is what I was referring to. So I feel like sometimes when I bring all these terms up, then I lose people. But if you want to talk about it and get specific,
yeah.
Yes.
This is for the listener, but I was curious because so we'll keep it simple.
Because the amygdala is part of your limbic system, and that's what happened for me. But with implicit memory, it specifically, obviously, I remember the fire, but there were other messages that weren't in words that were telling my system what to do. And I go more into details in the book about implicit memory. There are 3 basic arms. I'm talking mostly about emotional affective implicit memory, but it's basically telling my heart to beat faster, my throat to close up, the tears. I would get teary with this guy, and he's like, whoa, what is wrong with you? He didn't say that, but I could tell by the way he was talking to me. And plus I had been kind of mean. And so the messaging to the rest of my body was telling the rest of my body to do other things. You don't consciously tell your eyes to well up with tears. They do because you have a sensation. And just like our limbic system, we've all heard the awesome stories when there's a real threat to survival and people get extremely strong. Well, why is that? They're not that strong at that moment, but all the blood rushes to their limbs because a part of the brain kicks in and says, whoa, your friend's going to die. They're trapped under this car. You're going to pick the car up. You could never do that without all of your adrenaline kicking in to do some pretty incredible things, because we're programmed to survive, but we aren't telling our bodies to do that. Our bodies do it naturally. So I'm talking about how to recode, very specifically recode our implicit memory to have it optimized for what we want in our present day life.
So I'm curious, with the instance of the grease fire and your friend sort of playfully teasing you at getting this strong emotional reaction, had you struggled with that reaction for years, or had this been the first time you'd really encountered this emotional reaction that you had?
So have I ever felt sensitive about something that someone could tease me about? Yes. I mean, but typically I joke around with people, like sometimes, especially, oh gosh, now, like with my work where it's super intense, like I've pretty much been able to roll with difficult things. This one tapped into kind of a life or death experience for me. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't that I'd had a history with it. It's that, only the week prior, this thing had happened. It got encoded in that moment, like all trauma does when there's an image of the worst part of it.
Yeah.
That's how it gets encoded in our, if you've ever had something happen where you're like just frozen in what happens, but in real life, you've actually passed that. It happened 10 years ago, 5 years ago. You had to put your dog down, or you lost a family member, or, you witnessed an accident, or you were in an accident, right? Even though time has chronologically passed, some of those experiences can be frozen in our system, and then we react off of them if they're triggered. So he was triggering me by bringing it up, and bringing it up in a way that was making light of something that to me was encoded as something really serious. Not in my frontal lobe, like, right? I didn't even think, I was like, yeah, I made it through, no big deal. But the reaction right away was tapping into that life or death feeling I associated with it.
So for people listening to this, you gave some examples, like being in an accident, witnessing an accident. What are some of the more common causes of these traumas that you see when you work with clients now? Like, what are the common things that you're helping people work through?
Well, so the way that I work, and the book kind of has a nice array of different types of examples. It's very goal focused, and so it's more present day focused. So, I might be working with someone who wants to be able, and actually this is a great story, who wants to be able to be more social and go out more, has been, asked by her husband, this is someone that I actually worked with, to consider, not saying no to so many social invitations, this kind of a thing. And so she came in because she had some social anxiety, and she had struggled with anxiety for a lot of her life and tended to be a bit perfectionistic. Well, she came in, and we kind of identified and broke down what her goals were and how we would actually measure that they changed. So this is the type of goal. Underneath what was causing the anxiety was some very early distressing experiences she did not remember, but she had been told by her parents that she had gone through before the age of 2. Well,
like what kind of experiences?
She had some trauma in her biological family, which caused her to have to be moved from her home. And so she'd had some really rough beginnings in environments that were not ideal for like a little kid. Oh, and I guess you could probably relate to that with a little one of your own. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Not that it's happening.
Right. Not that it's going on, but yeah. Right. Yeah, totally.
Exactly. And so again, like she didn't consciously remember it. And this is where the hippocampus comes in, because it's not fully formed till you're 3 or 4. So it doesn't timestamp experiences, and it doesn't hold chronological memory. So no memory all these symptoms. I wouldn't have even known this or gotten into it so much if we weren't using a brain-based approach, which is nonverbal. We did the processing and we changed the coding in her system. And to make a long story short, but the beautiful thing about doing this type of work is it's usually not very long term. I only worked with her for about 3 months. Not only did all of her anxiety go away, she didn't like social environments because she felt like she couldn't control what was going on, and that she didn't think this, but she felt like she might be in danger. And so not only did all of her anxiety symptoms go down, and she felt much freer around potentially making a mistake when she was out and about, but she had had psoriasis, which is an inflammatory skin condition that had been medically treated for over 30 years, and it completely went away.
Man.
So that was really cool because we're one system, but we tend to think of it separately, like physical health, mental health, these different aspects of well-being, but it's all integrated. And so it was really cool. And frankly, she was like, my dermatologist wants to talk to you. She cannot believe what she's seeing. And I am not a dermatologist. And she did not come to me saying, I want my psoriasis to go away, but it did after we did the work. It was super cool.
That's amazing. And I've heard stories like this with different modalities of therapy, some being more effective than others. I mean, my friends and I talk about plant therapies all the time, of the power of, MDMA that's going to be legal in the next few years, and psychedelics. But this sounds really rooted in a scientific approach that what kind of success rate do people tend to see with EMDR?
Well, I couldn't tell you the exact statistic. There has been a lot of research done on it. I can tell you for me, with my clients, it's very high. But part of that is that I'm very careful about selecting the type of treatment that might be best for them and making sure that we don't jump into kind of the full protocol until they're ready. So some people come ready, and this is going to get pretty complicated pretty fast, but some people come ready. Some people might not be so ready for different reasons. They might have some pretty significant issues with trust. They might have lower resources around being able to shift from one emotion to the other. And all of these things, when you're in a state where you're going kind of into the different parts of the brain, can make it hard for someone to follow the process. Not because there's something wrong with them. They just might need to build up some resources.
Yeah, they're not quite ready.
They're not quite ready. And because they're not controlling what's happening, this is just going to happen, then I won't suggest it. I'm very, candid with my clients. I tell them what's happening, and we'll work to build that until they're ready.
Wow. So who is an ideal candidate for you?
Okay, so an ideal client for me, honestly, is someone that's really motivated. And typically maybe because of where I am in Washington, D.C., or maybe because of some of the networks, and because, I have this big center, and so certain people ask for me specifically. My ideal client is someone who is very motivated, and they're motivated because they've tried a bunch of other things, and they're really frustrated that they haven't gotten the results they wanted, or they're frustrated that they understand intellectually every aspect of what's getting in their way with, job performance or relationship struggles or what have you, and they're not making the progress that they want. I love that, because I think what really motivated me to write the book is the number of people that I've met in my personal and professional life who legitimately do not understand that at that moment where they feel like they're backed into a corner and there really are no other options, and they've checked the checkbox of all the things that they need to try to move forward or to have success in what they want for their life, that they realize and they come in contact with a whole other set of opportunities to make change. And I love that. Like, that's the type of client I like. And I'll tell you honestly, a lot of times these clients are learners. They have come across this because they've researched it on the internet, or because they're very motivated to have the life that they want to live. So that's my favorite type of client. But to be honest, it's so gratifying just to see people in a reality that they didn't realize even existed, right? They're like, and I'm not talking about, I could tell you, and I do tell a lot of stories in the book about pretty drastic changes that happen for people, but it's the way they actually feel in their bodies. I love that, where they're like, wow, people have kind of talked about this and I didn't know what they meant until this moment when I actually feel different right now.
Wow. That's really incredible. I'd imagine it's just such a gratifying way to have your career, to help people in this way. And within 3 months is when you tend to deliver results with them, right?
It depends on the person. It's been less than that. It's been more than that. I actually had a client who was in a plane crash. It was a professional trip, and she had to travel for work. She had a very prestigious job. She survived the crash, blacked out during the midst of it, had a pretty significant back injury, but survived and, did her physical therapy for her back, but could not get on a plane. She actually really couldn't tolerate even being in an airport, because if she heard the sounds that had become encoded in this part of her brain, in her implicit memory, she would have a full-on panic attack and was immobilized.
Man, one of my close friends had the exact same thing happen to them. Sorry, keep going.
But a plane crash?
Yeah, she witnessed a plane crash actually on the way to the airport and couldn't get on a plane without having a panic attack. Yeah.
Yes, it's terrible. And it can be, for this particular person, this was a pending major loss. She had worked extremely hard to be where she was, and her job required travel. And so she was referred by another therapist specifically to do this brain-based work. And she was, really working hard not to have to get on a plane. She'd take a train across the country, but some of her flights were international. It was not sustainable. So with her, honestly, I always do some preparatory sessions, and I do a few kind of follow-ups just to get them into the groove of how to integrate the work that we've done. But we only had maybe 3 sessions of the actual brain-based work. She was fine to get on a plane, no problem. And that is pretty awesome. Now, when people this was an adult trauma, single incident. She had no significant family of origin kind of disappointments or neglect or any of that type of thing. I do end up seeing a lot of clients who come from affluent families. What the picture looks like is a white picket fence, mom and dad, everything like the way you see in a storybook. But their actual childhood was one where they were pretty neglected. Parents were working, no one was around, didn't really get a lot of their emotional needs met. So that's an interesting one. I am a trauma specialist, but you see some of the same symptoms with something that society says is fine because it all looks fine on the outside, but it's not actually really fine on the inside. And I really like working with those clients too, because they're puzzled, or they oftentimes feel like they're broken, like there's something wrong with them if they're having struggles with relationships or having struggles with public speaking or things like that. So you asked me a question before just about kind of which type of clients, and really it has more to do with what kind of goals they want to set, and we work from the present day.
Yeah, man, you described a close friend of mine to a T on that last part, and he's very motivated, tried a ton of things over the last 5 years. He understands intellectually what's getting in his way, and he's from the exact type of childhood that you just described. So I'm definitely going to be sending him your book and
awesome.
and this episode to listen to. But this has been really fascinating. And for people who are interested in the book, is there anything else that you want to touch upon that they might get excited about and get them off the fence to go buy your book?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about your friend that you just talked about and wanted to tell you, when you send him a copy of the book, what I really am proud of is that there's a really nice appendix in the back. You asked me specifically about one of many types of brain-based therapies, and there are many types of body-based therapies that also are effective at getting into some of those codes that are stored in implicit memory. And there's a full appendix with lots of websites that is built to empower the reader to say, hey, reader, things aren't what they seem, and there's a whole other world out there. And let me empower you with a little bit of brain-based anatomy, not even as deep as what you were asking me, Charlie. So just to give the reader language and the ability to ask for what they want. In the conclusion, there's specific things to ask someone who provides one of these different types of modalities. The table is pretty extensive. It has a lot of different links in it. And then in one of my chapters, I actually break down a methodology that I developed for people to discover what is actually coded in their implicit memory, which sounds pretty simple, but it's not, because it's in your unconscious. So it's very hard to do on your own. But in one of these chapters, it actually breaks down this 4-part methodology called PACT, so that the reader can do this on their own, not to recode it, but to actually identify what might be in there. And it's a wild process, because oftentimes once they hear it and they sit with it, what the code might be, they're like, wow, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But it's not something typically that they would come up with on their own, because they're sitting there going, why can't I do this? Why is this not working out? Why do I still, struggle with drugs or eating or avoidance? Or why, I work with a lot of people who want love in their life or want relationships, but they themselves sabotage it. And they're very puzzled about why they would do that. Because if you ask them, do you want this? They're like, heck yeah, I totally want this.
You're describing me before I did therapy, literally. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's the whole thing. That's why the title ended up being Live Empowered, because many, many empowerment movements in our history begin with the idea of seeing what's not visible, like those subtle things that keep us held back. And so the whole book is designed to empower people. And Charlie, because you keep mentioning a friend of this or a friend of that, or you yourself, I think you'll like looking through the appendix and being curious about what might be possible next and why.
Awesome. Yeah, I so admire you for putting this book together. And it really does feel like there is a movement going on toward a better understanding of the systems and the programming in the brain, and these tools and methods that we can use to rewire them to live better. And I'm glad your book is playing a piece in that puzzle. So I've just got a few more questions for you, Julie. The first one is, what is the best way for our listeners to connect with you, to follow you, to potentially even work with you?
So let's see. Well, my center in Washington is, do you want the actual website?
Yeah, wherever you send people.
Yeah, www.vivapartnership.com. That's VIVA. More information about my speaking and training and these workshops that I do and facilitation can be found at drjulielopez.com. And I'll tell you a personal favorite of mine. This isn't necessarily helping any listener find me, but we recently developed a free online mental health resource called the Resilient Brain Project, and that's where you can find it.com. It's 100% free, and it's built to empower the user through apps and blogs and information, here and now information, scientific information, groups where they can connect and feel normal around struggles that they might be having. And it's also for allies like family and friends. I'm really proud of it, and it's a personal kind of love offering project that I'd love to see getting out to the world because it's free.
Awesome. Very cool. So Viva Partnership. And you also do retreats as well.
And I do retreats, not a lot of retreats. I get asked to come in and facilitate other people's retreats, and then I have an annual retreat in the dead of winter in Washington, D.C. It gets very cold. Yesterday it was 12 degrees here. And in another week, I'll be heading out to the Caribbean.
Nice.
To an island with a group of women to work together for a week. I love it.
Excellent. Well, listeners can be sure to check out those resources. And the final question I have for you is to give our listeners a challenge. What is the one thing they can do this week from your book that will have a positive impact on their lives?
So what I would say, Charlie, is to actually go to that site, the Resilient Brain Project, and take a look at one of the topics that you might struggle with right now. Because if you just look at one, you will realize there's a way out of it.
Awesome. So the book is Live Empowered. It's on Amazon. Julie Lopez, thank you so much for being on the show.
Charlie, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much again to Dr. Julie Lopez for being on the show. You can buy her book, Live Empowered, on Amazon.com. Be sure to check out authorhour.co for a full transcript and show notes of this episode. You can also leave us a review on iTunes. In case you didn't know that was a possibility, I'd suggest you go do that now. It'll only take about 27 seconds, and it will mean a lot. Thanks for tuning into today's show. If you liked what you heard, here's what I want you to do next. Open up the podcast app on your phone or iTunes on your computer and search for Author Hour with Charlie Hoehn. And then click Ratings and Reviews. Take 10 seconds to rate this show or leave a review. It's a small favor, but it's really the best way to show your support and give me feedback. And if you know someone else who'd love Author Hour, take another 3 seconds to text them a link to this episode. We'll see you next time.